Hey everyone, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, and I am your host, Andrew Davis. And before I introduce my guest, I would just like to remind everybody and say that if you like something, you need to support it, whether it is this show, a wrestling show, a wrestler, or even corporate media. I personally don't care, but you need to support it, and you need to support it financially. Otherwise, it doesn't get made. So keep that in mind, everybody, and try to engage with that because, well, if you like something, well, go out and buy it. So I'm going to say on that point. But enough of my PSA because I have with me professional wrestler Landon Hale. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I am stoked to have you on because obviously I saw you wrestle. I just had Armenia on a little while ago, about 35 minutes ago. We just ended, and so there's a lot of stuff going on. You wrestled him last week. Something sort of going on with you that we're going to talk about. But before we get into all that, I do just want to briefly talk about how you got into wrestling because you have an interesting training, I guess, upbringing and all that stuff. So I think it's fascinating who you were trained by and then trained secondly with and all that stuff.
Yeah, so my love of wrestling came when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and that was something that my dad and I were very like. That's the thing that we bonded over a lot was wrestling and out of everything. So unfortunately, my dad passed away when I was 7, so I've only had him for 7 years. And whenever we were growing up, that was like the one thing that we were heavy on was wrestling. We would watch like WCW. Like I was a big fan of Rey Mysterio. He was a big fan of Kevin Nash, and it was one of those deals that my area of Kentucky, it's not very popular like the Northeast, where it's like it's a hotbed for wrestling or for like independents at least. So the only thing that they would know would be TV wrestling. So with that in mind, as I was getting older, obviously with I was playing sports like basketball and baseball, and I thought those would work out for me. And then I guess, fast forward after undergrad, I was like, you know what? I only have one life to live. Let's see where this wrestling, like where wrestling takes me. So one of my friends, Adam Newsom, he made a post on Facebook, and it was just like compared to wrestlers, and so I answered it, and then I just kept answering and answering. And I was like, you know what? I want to see where this takes me. So I just messaged him. And I was like, how do you get into wrestling? And then he said, what are you doing this date? And I was like, nothing. He's like, come up and we'll get you started. So I trained. My first ever legit wrestling back bump was in a legit, like it was in a backyard. I mean, there was a ring set up, but it was in a backyard, which was really cool. And unfortunately enough, it was one of my friends, which he passed away last year. But we used his ring, or we used that ring out back, and everything was cool. And just it felt like I was at home. It felt like I was a kid. Next day, obviously, I was sore as hell, but it was nice to like get in the feel of things. And so I talked to my buddy Adam again, and just try to get where I would need to go for the basics and the best training possible in my area. So that's when he was telling me about a guy by the name of Mike Sampson, which on the Indies he goes by Iron Cross. So he's an old school wrestler. He was a jobber for the WWF. So he jobbed out to like the Steiner brothers, the Hart Foundation. He was really well known, and he was a great worker. And so he was very old school with his work. So I trained under him for, I think it was like 2 times is when I had like 2 training sessions, and then my first ever match was literally 2 days later, and it was thrown out of nowhere. And so after 2 training sessions, I had my first match, and then I had a few more training sessions before I went down to Georgia for chiropractic school. And then when I went down to Georgia, that's where I was looking into different, places. Like, there was the Nightmare Factory. There's like a bunch of other places that, they're really well known. And to look into it, I was like, what would help me benefit me a little bit more? And I looked, and again, like everyone, respecting everyone and their teachings, but I looked into All Pro Wrestling Academy, which was under Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express. So when I went to his place, he literally helped me, tear down the foundation that I had, to help rebuild it, to help, make it more sturdy. And then from there, I trained under him for about 2.5, almost 3 years until his school shut down. And then I ended up going to WWA4, and I trained a little under a year under AR Fox. So I have a little bit of the old school, a little bit of the new school in me. Then after a year later, I moved up to Massachusetts after I graduated from chiropractic school, and me and my wife got married, and so now I'm at New England Pro Wrestling Academy, and I'm repping them tonight. So
Yeah, see, this is what's fascinating is that your training is beyond interesting because you got that old school, you got AR Fox, and then obviously you got that New England stuff. Then New England Wrestling Academy is just well known all over the place. And so it's super interesting because you have such a unique blend of a foundation and I guess components, for lack of a better word. And I feel like that's really benefited you as a wrestler in a lot of ways and everything that you've done in a very short amount of time at Lariat Pro and a variety of other places. And so, what is this like to really diversify your training? Because I think a lot of wrestlers don't do that.
it's definitely helped me out a lot because I've always wanted to be the wrestler. Because again, like I've grown up watching Rey Mysterio, and even though he's a high flyer, he was a smaller guy, so he had to use what he can to his advantage. So obviously, I'm not big like the Big Show or Andre the Giant, where I'm 400, 500 pounds, but I could still have the style of like, okay, if I want to be more versatile, then I could be able to, understand the old school ways, understand how to chain, understand how to be a technician, and also still utilize high flying and strong style. So that's something that definitely have has an advantage when it comes to like understanding storylines and understanding wrestling in different places. Because in the South, there's a lot of high flying action where it's kind of like the Northeast, where it's fast paced, like boom, 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 versus sometimes mostly in the South, it's very slow pace where the crowd wants to get, I mean, obviously everyone wants to get involved, but it's like a very slower pace where you don't have to do as much. And so it's all about the psychology behind everything. So it's really nice to dig deep into those foundations and to understand those roots and to be able to expand more than just one style.
Yeah, and let's even talk about going a little bit down south because I think Lariat Pro is a really cool place in that regard, where that's where you were cutting your teeth in a lot of ways, and you had some amazing matches with Jake Foy as well as as part of Basing Regenesis with Scotty Beach, and there's a few others, and obviously, I mean there's some crazy matches. You faced the End a bunch of times. And so, what was this like? Really having those matches and going down into like this is like the early part of your career too. Right? And so, what was
Yeah,
this like? Because this is when you were just, I feel like, getting trained up, and you didn't have that New England stuff in you yet, per se.
exactly. And so it's cool because what's funny is that and this is something that no one will ever get. So Jake Foy is Matt, so it's Matt Odom is his ring name. I'm sure he's seen it before, he posts on everywhere. But what's funny is that I wasn't there for that show, but they still put it as Landon Hale defeats Jake Foy, but he was supposed to go by Matt Odom. So I defeated Jake Foy without even being there, which is awesome, and I popped for that. But but no, just wrestling for Lariato is nice because you get to be with the Good Brothers, you get to be with Doc and Carl, and I love Doc to death. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And you get to have those experiences, and some of those experiences being with Lariato got the chance for me to wrestle for Impact Plus, and for me to, do a seminar in front of Scott D'Amore, the president of Impact Wrestling. And then it also led me a spot to doing some backstage stuff. And so I was able to do a backstage vignette for Sami Callihan before he fought Kenny Omega at SummerSlam or not SummerSlam, Slammiversary last year, which was pretty cool. So it was just a lot of doors open for that.
Yeah, let's even talk about that because that's one of the things that I think people don't understand. And obviously, I was speaking to somebody last night in comic books and building relationships and also being in certain areas at the right time. It's very important, I think, that people don't understand. And wrestling and comics are similar in that regard. And it seems that obviously you were in certain promotions and those relationships were being built. And I think ultimately what happened with Impact Plus and doing those vignettes and that stuff ultimately led you to sort of being brought up into New England and obviously training there and all that stuff. And I think that people get discovered when you do that stuff. And so I think it's very important that people recognize and understand that, hey, certain promotions are going to give you an opportunity. And that exposure is worth more than what they're going to pay you to wrestle.
Exactly, and I'll piggyback on that a little bit more. To this day, and I consider him one of my closest friends in wrestling, Matt Griffin, and he is the promoter for excuse me, he is the promoter for Action Wrestling in Tyrone, Georgia. And that's where like AC Mac was built. That's where we did Southeast first, and that's where AC Mac won the IWTV championship from Alex Shelley. So being in that atmosphere, but to backtrack a little bit more, they did something for Action, which is called Next Up, and it's for people that help set up the ring and just want to get their foot in the door. And when I showcased, their first match on their first episode, Matt was impressed with what I did. So he asked me to be on the Future Showcase, which is part of the Scenic City Invitational, which is a big tournament that they have in the Southeast that helps you build up your brand, helps build up the people, so that way you can help get more exposure. And so when I did the Future Showcase, people were on Twitter or on social media saying like, "Oh my gosh, who is this Landon Hale guy?" They keep going on from there. I've had shows for Paradigm Pro Wrestling, which they're out of Indiana. They're great. I've had a lot of stuff with, like you were saying, like Larry Otto with doing Impact Plus. And there's just a lot of great opportunities from there. And with all of that said, it helped lead me to, again, with my wife, we moved up to Massachusetts, and this is a good place for me to wrestle. And I remember doing some pre-show matches for Empire State Wrestling, and I did a pre-show match for We Are Wrestling. And We Are Wrestling, I did a seminar under Jay Lethal, and that got me eyes in front of not only Jay Lethal, but also a bunch of other wrestlers and some promoters that were there. And that not only led me on to the pre-show, which I was handpicked by Jay Lethal, but I'm also going to be on the future We Are Wrestling shows as well. So it's all about getting out there and making those great connections. So it's been very beneficial.
Yeah, let's even talk about the Future Showcase, because obviously you and Eli Knight really tore it up. And that kind of started a mini rivalry, as I view it, in great matches. And I don't think it's over yet. I think there's a few more in the two of you that
there's
fantastic.
There's a lot more for sure. Yeah. So we actually started in the Future Showcase in 2021, and it was me versus Eli Knight versus Whisper in a triple threat. And that was the first round. Then
that guy's been around forever. The Whisperer, that guy's been around forever, and he's like a snake. And that's a code for something. That's a code for something.
Yeah, he's awesome. But I remember having that match, and then someone was supposed to fight Eli, but I guess it was like due to like different reasons, they ended up throwing me in there in the Southeast first match, and me and Eli, we just put on a banger of a match, and everything went great there. And then whenever I was getting ready to come down to the South, Matt was like, "Oh yeah, I got a surprise for you. You're wrestling Eli Knight." And then that's when that match happened. And then the shooting star with the V trigger went viral, and I was really shocked by that. I got tweeted out by Hurricane Helms, which is pretty cool. I popped for that. But yeah, and it's just like, I think that sort of helped me out. I mean, people say like, oh, you did that in front of 15 people, but it's like, it's not the fact that it's in front of people on like in person, but it's for the people that's watching all around, because it's a very popular event.
This is exactly where I was going with this, because one of the things that I'm now speaking about, and I actually just uploaded an interview that I did a little while ago, but I'm reshooting out with AJ Alexander, and it's the idea that at a certain point, wrestlers, I feel like, need to be on streaming services, and that you're not necessarily anymore wrestling in front of a crowd, where you could be wrestling in front of 15 people, but if it's streaming to 5,000 people and then they're tweeting, that's what I think really makes the difference now. And so this Future Showcase, I'm in Connecticut. Nothing against Action Wrestling, but I'm not coming down to Action Wrestling because it's just too far away for me, as a fan, but I watch it. And I think that's the thing that's super interesting. And that's why these matches are so fascinating. It's the same thing with that match with JD Newman in TWE, where people were seeing that match, but they're not in Tennessee. They might be in California. They might be in Connecticut. They might be in Canada, but they're seeing it. And that influences, and that really gets other promoters saying, "Hey, who's this guy?" And then obviously you get a clip that blows up. And so what is that like for you? Because it's now a massive change in wrestling, I feel.
It's weird, because I've always had those moments where, and like I've thought about different ideas where it's like, hey, maybe I could do this and post it. You're expecting like, a big prayer. You're like, please let this be the one. And with this, I was like, there's no way this could be denied. And the fact that we pulled that off to where like I was able to hit him with that, and then everything was great on that end, and it was just I think it went perfectly to where people see like, oh, who is this guy? Because it's like if he's willing to hit some crazy stuff out of nowhere, then maybe we can see more of him. Like it's all it takes is like one clip that shows exactly who this person is, and then they want to see more and more and more. So I'm excited for the rest of like what the future holds, because it seemed like that's what helped me kickstart a little bit more, because I guess I was kind of down on myself moving up to the Northeast at first, because like you were mentioning, not a lot of people will fly down to Georgia to watch the show, or hell, they may not even watch the show at all because they have all of their talent in the Northeast. So it's not like they're losing anything if they don't watch it. So as I come up to the Northeast, people are like, okay, we've heard of Landon Hale, but who is he? And that's when it's kind of like I'm starting from square one again.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit because I think one of the best things that has happened is that Beyond had uncharted territory down south. And I think that actually somewhat broke the mold. And I'm not saying they brought everybody along for uncharted territory down, south and then for season 4. But I think they brought a bunch of people saying, hey, look, I'm a fan of Beyond. I'm a fan of uncharted territory. And then you have people action. I think it's an actions territory. I think it's like in their thing. I think like they are like the flag of action up there. And I know that it's sort of, AC Mac is front and center on that. And I think that's really helped a little bit where people are now watching that and saying, hey, I'm watching this. And who else is in the South who's wrestling on other things? I don't think everybody's been converted from the Northeast down to the South per se, but I definitely think that some have. But I get the point as well where people, it is a concern when you start, moving in things territory. But my first promotion on IWTV was St. Louis Anarchy. And, I just was like, oh, this is really cool. And again, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. So it's super interesting. But I think even another match at Action that was pretty cool and that also helped was your match against Adam Priest, because that guy is, on fire. Obviously, what he did with Derek Neal was great. And then obviously even going further into that, his recovery and him coming back and the way he just works, it's great. And I think that also really helped too. And I also think that talent just rises, and exceeds territories right now.
Absolutely, yeah, and Adam's a great guy when it comes to both in and out of the ring, and just with all the publicity and all the exposure that he's been getting from Uncharted Territories is amazing. And also a sidebar on that too, it just happens to be perfect timing to where as I'm getting ready to move up to the Northeast, that's when Uncharted Territories is coming to the South, or came to the South. And so they kind of put a damper on my end because I was wanting to do some stuff with Uncharted Territories if it was still with, Beyond and still in the Northeast. So I don't know where it's taking it now. Hopefully back in the Northeast. Don't know where it shifts, but hopefully it's back up in the Northeast. But no, back to Adam though. He's a great guy and he's a great worker. Love what he does, and he's very aggressive, and he puts everything what he means into his work. So I'm very thankful that I get to wrestle him, and hopefully I'll get to wrestle him again soon.
Yeah, and then even talking about Paradigm and that and wrestling there. I mean, obviously that was the rematch with Jaden Newman, and Jaden Newman is one of the hardest working guys in wrestling. He is a box full of surprises as an individual. He was on my old show that is sort of fusing with this show, and he's just also one of the nicest guys in wrestling. And he's beyond talented, and he's stupid good is the only way I describe him. And you had 2 matches with him. And what was that like? Because that's kind of a crazy situation. And those matches were great as well. And I feel like those matches also helped to put you on the map in a lot of ways.
And I'll even say this, it wasn't 2 matches, it was 3 matches.
Oh, I'm missing one. My bad.
So no, you're good. No, so we had a wrestling match at PWX Pure, and this was back when PWX was still running. I don't know what their situation is, but last year in August, we wrestled on the PWX Pure show, and that was a great time. And then we wrestled at TWE, and then we finally wrestled at Paradigm. What's funny about Paradigm is that I was supposed to wrestle Cole Radrick in January of that, like the first show. Excuse me, but he ended up not showing up due to COVID, which I got to wrestle him in March following, which that was a great match too. But yeah, Jaden is one of those guys that's like you see him, you automatically become friends with him. And obviously, like when it comes to the ring, we're fighting, we're drawing blood when it comes to us fighting. It's fist for fist, blood for blood. Like it's literally, it's hard hitting, it's whatever style you want it to be. But at the end of the day, that's my brother. I love that man to death, and he's one of the greatest people, and he deserves everything that goes his way and more. And I see that he's going out to Germany and he's doing some stuff with NWA. So I'm very thankful that he's getting the recognition that he deserves. So hopefully it's uphill from here.
Yeah, and it's also the idea that, I mean, he just knows everybody. And it's also that idea that, I mean, he has his own promotion that he's running, and it's that connection, down south as well. And even just, making friends in wrestling. I mean, he's a really good person to know in the wrestling scene. I think that's something that people don't sometimes realize, that once you start getting to know people, doors open up very, very quickly in a lot of ways. But I digress right there. And then obviously Cole Radrick is just a beast. That guy is good too. I mean, he's just, I don't know how to describe Cole Radrick any other way. But I'm really curious. So obviously you moved up to, and you were moving up to the Northeast. And so obviously, what was that like? Because the Northeast is very different than the South. It's very different than the Midwest, where the Northeast, especially New England, is very connected. You got Limitless, you got Chaotic, you have shoot, I'm trying to think of Dummy Exo and Rip Bison's promotion off the top
Pro
of my
Wrestling Grind.
Yes, I should know that because Delmy follows me, and that's really not a good thing for me. That's really not a good. I should know that off the top of my head. But also you have things in Brooklyn, you have things in New York City, which it's a little bit of a drive, but it's still relatively close. And obviously you got Wrestling Open, and then there's some other stuff that's also out there. So what was this like coming up to that, and really sort of, I don't want to say starting over, but getting reacquainted, I think, is a good word to use. And getting
I, I say that is a really good way of using that, and the only reason I'm saying starting over is that it's not like I'm a well-known name around, like I'm not a TV name or like a top indie name. It's like I'm still scratching the surface of like where I need to be in life as in the wrestling business. So with that in mind, it's like, okay, like I'm making a lot of noise in the South. Hopefully some of that will kind of be like a hurricane, where pun intended, because I know they just had a hurricane today. Love you, Florida. That they come up to the Northeast and like kind of like resonate that way. So that way when I get eyes on me in the South, it's like, okay, we know who this guy is. And then as I come up, I have the people who don't know. Some people may know who I am, others may not. So it's just kind of like getting my foot in the door again. And that's where like I would do some of these pre-shows where, again, it's like sticking my neck out for other places. And it's helped me get on shows like now it's supposed to be on the NFW, but whatever. But but it's also like, being in those situations where like I've had those tough moments of like, man, am I making the right move coming up here, and trying to get into wrestling in the Northeast. And it was like a little bit of a struggle, and then it's like success started coming my way. I had my match with Max Caster, which was great, and I had that on there, and it wasn't like
we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that, but we're gonna table that for 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we only do that in rap.
Exactly. And so with him, and then there's a bunch of other places that's wanting to do work with me and do business with me, and it's great. And I'm doing stuff with Chaotic, I'm doing stuff with Wrestling Open, and so it's definitely opened a lot of doors for me for the future. So it's definitely going uphill, which I mean I know now I have a little bit of a roadblock, which is fine, but it's nice to
talk
get
about
that.
this Northeast stuff, because obviously the big thing is that Wrestling Open kind of, and I just had Armenian Chaos on, and we were talking about this a little bit where, and look, I take the position where I think the first 5 episodes of Wrestling Open were a big gamble, where it could have gone either way. It could have, and obviously I think it's now stable. I think it's paid off, but it could have flopped because you took Beyond away down south, and well, what's up north? And it's a fair point. I think that is where it could have gone either way. But you come up, and then how did you get involved with Wrestling Open? Because now that show is running pretty good, and I've missed a bunch of it, to be very honest with you. I took a break from wrestling because I was just burned out from watching wrestling, which I can't explain that. But now I'm back watching it. I'm like, man, this is really good, and it's got the right pacing, and it's fun. And so how did you get involved with Wrestling Open?
So with Wrestling Open, I had a lot of people stick their necks out for me, and it was nice to like, for them to tell me like who, like, again, this is confirming like who I am from people that's trusted in at Wrestling Open. And it's like, hey, like here's this kid that's trained by Robert Gibson and AR Fox, mostly Robert Gibson, but it's one of those, it's sticking your neck out for people. And then it's always good to have those people on your side, because some people, they may say that they're on your side, but at the end of the day, they're just doing business for themselves. And so I'm very thankful for those people at the end of the day. And so it's like they've given me a chance. And then now it's like, I've had a few matches. I've done a lot of pre-show matches, which again, it's all about, trying to find the right place and time for all of this thing. But it was really nice to get into that little spot to like help me elevate a little bit of myself and who I am and who my character is, and let the people of Worcester know and on IWTV know more about me and who I am as a wrestler. So it's been a great experience so far, and I'm excited to see
And I
where
want
it
to talk
takes
about
me.
some of them. I definitely want to talk about some of them. I think the Ray Jazz match was great. I
Thank
think
you.
that guy is an ultra heel. I think that guy, and I'm going to say it, and hopefully he's not going to get upset. He is a douchebag, and he's perfect. He is perfect, because that is the exact character. He hits it right on the head, and he is perfect in the way he talks, and he's smooth in the ring. And that match was great, because you're pretty much matching him in that match, and
I
it
appreciate
was
that.
insane. And it's like, no offense to either one of you, but I never heard of either one of you. And I'm like, man, who are these two kids doing this? And how has this not been done before? Was my reaction.
Right.
And so what was that like? Because I think that's a match that people are like, okay, we don't know who these two are, but we want to see more of this.
Well, I know that Ray Jazz, before I came up, I know that he was doing some things he was on the first, I believe he was on the first episode of Wrestling Open, and just trying to like get his foot in the door, because I know he's mostly out of like New York and New Jersey, respecting that area. And then, so now the fact that he's come up every single Thursday just to wrestle, to do promos, to do whatever, it's it's awesome on his end that he's actually getting his foot in the door and that he's making some name for himself. So I'm proud of him in all aspects. But yeah, he does definitely plays the douchebag role very quite nicely. But
Excellent. I mean, this is like MJF douchebag, that's that he is legitimately incarnating MJF. It's not, and I don't say that lightly, and it makes for a great match, and it's just something that's very cool. And it's also really cool that you're sort of both really in a very similar place now, starting to gain ground, I feel. And it's kind of nice to see that. And then obviously, you know, he's doing his thing, and then you're doing your thing. And that Max Caster match from Max Caster's AEW, Max Caster is getting a lot of attention. I love the fact that it was like a 10,000K match, which is always nice to have that gimmick in there. And what was that like being trusted? Because obviously Max Caster comes in and out, Shakru connection with, Beyond Wrestling Open, and even to get that spotlight on you, because that's a big spotlight, and there's a lot of trust that has to be instilled in you to be put into that, saying, hey, I can deliver a hell of a match with him. And I mean, it's obviously got attention, and so that's also really cool. So what was even just the mentality of it, I guess?
talk about adrenaline, but kick through another level, because like every time I go out, I'm always hyped up. I always have the adrenaline kicked in, but I think the adrenaline was such at an override that, again, like you were saying, I have to put on a hell of a match, because this isn't AEW Dark where it's boom, 1, 2, 3, whatever. This is like I get to wrestle on IWTV with now one half of the AEW World Tag Champions, and it's the fact that we had such a good match, and the mentality going in is that it's like okay, the adrenaline's kicking in, and yes, it's a TV star, but at the end of the day, you have to keep that mentality of like, this is just another wrestler, still show people who you are. So that's what I
Also,
did.
there was a lot of press surrounding that, because obviously, I think this Max Caster's tag partner is openly gay, and that
Mhm.
was getting a lot of attention too. So naturally, anything that Max Caster is associated with, 'cause this just dropped. Obviously, the belts, they just won the belts, and so now there's a lot of attention with both those guys. Now he's on Wrestling Open. Now you're wrestling him, which means that attention's on you. And it sounds like a crazy thing, and like we need a flow chart here, but that only added to more people watching and paying attention. And obviously, it's a good thing. There's no such thing as bad attention. You know what I mean? And so, it's a high pressure situation.
It is, and I think with that match, it definitely delivered on all aspects because and like I said too, like I've had my fair share of like doing a lot of. I think I've done more pre-show matches on Wrestling Open than Wrestling Open itself. And again, it could be the fact that they don't have a spot for me just yet, and that's totally fine because I respect what Wrestling Open's doing. But the fact that we had this match where they're like, "Hey, let's put Landon in this match with Max," and we put on a match that we could deliver, that was a fun match, and I enjoyed every single bit of it. And it was, and granted, I didn't win the 10K that could help me out with my loans, but at the end of the day, it's all about that match experience, and just everything flowed so well, and I was so thankful for that match. Like that's one of my favorite matches of this year for sure.
Yeah, and then obviously you had a few more matches. Obviously, you faced Danny Mills, and
Hmm.
that was cool. Or Miles, I'm not too sure.
Denny Miles.
Miles, I misread. It's been a long day, everybody. And then you also had Randy Rivera, and then
Hmm.
you had my guest who was on about like 35, 40 minutes ago, Armani Chaos, and I love Armani. I love him from Higher Society, and he's freaking fantastic. And I thought that was a great match too. And we were joking on Twitter. This is how this started, guys. I was joking on Twitter. I'm like, hey, you want to come on my show? Why not? Right? And I thought it was a funny way to get an interview, and I didn't expect anything out of it. So thank you for being here, by the way. But I thought the ending to that match was great. I thought both of you did a great job in that match, and I also thought that what happened elsewhere, where it was going to be a heel turn, and then it was like a double heel turn, and then it was like a triple heel turn at the end. That was great.
Yeah, it was a great time, and again, with that set aside, I think that's definitely going to be a good thing going forward with me, Armani, Randy, and Gall. So I think that would be something good for the future. So it just depends on what happens, but I know Gall could take care of himself. He's got muscles on muscles. So
And obviously, I had a feeling something was going to be in the works, whether it's going to be this week, next week, or a few weeks down the road. But something happened this weekend, and you had a injury at a wrestling show, and your hands somewhat messed up, and obviously that's delayed certain things.
yeah.
So for those who haven't seen it and don't know what I'm referring to, you could explain sort of what happened and all that stuff and what it looks like for the next 2 months, I want to say, give or take.
So I wrestled last Saturday at Fight Life, and it was a match against Ricky Snokes and TJ Crawford in a triple threat. I came down for a frog splash, and as I came down, rather than landing on my forearm, I landed on an outstretched hand like this, and I broke a bone in my wrist, and it's called a scaphoid. So you have 8 bones in your wrist, and so one of them got fractured. So now it determined. So I went to the orthopedic surgeon, or the orthopedist, I should say, and he was saying that I would have to be in this for at least 2 months, but it's give or take. It could be more, it could be less, because in the next 2 weeks I'll get a CT scan to see how the bone is healing. Then from there, I see a hand specialist for second opinion to see if it needs, see if I can, see if I need to be in this more than, it may be more than 2 months, it may be less than 2 months. So I won't know for the next couple of weeks, but in the meantime, I got this bad boy on.
And the reason why I bring this up is that don't try this at home, kids. Those old WWE commercials, they existed for a reason. Um, but the reason why I bring this up is that obviously you're going to be out for a few months, one way or the other, and then you're going to be rehabbing it. But I do want to remind people that wrestling is a combat sport, and that things can happen, and that shit happens. And it does, plans change, and it's dangerous. And obviously, if you don't see Landon Hale on a wrestling show for a few weeks or a month, the reason why is that obviously something happened at another show. That there you go. Which means you should go buy his T-shirts now. That's what that means. But that was not written in the interview. I just want to make that crystal clear.
just a quick plug right there. I love it. just he's out. So prowrestlingtees.com/Landon Hale.
But even going further into this, because obviously you were gaining traction, and I think this is what IWTV is doing very well right now, where it's the idea that I think 3 years ago, a lot of wrestling shows were taped and then were released, And sometimes they were put on YouTube, sometimes they were put on Twitch, sometimes they went straight to DVD or Blu-ray, or sometimes they went, a year later onto VOD, whatever it was. And I think there's been a real shift now where wrestlers are saying, I need to be seen streamed, and I need to be seen almost like a live sports game where you can catch the replay, but it's the idea of interacting with somebody on Twitter. It's the idea of interacting with fans. It's the idea that people are tweeting about me live, and that I get back to the locker room, I check my phone, and I got 14 different, people tweeting about me, or I got 140 notifications on Twitter. And so what has that been like? Because I think that is a big dictating factor right now in bookings and promotions calling you up and opportunities really knocking on people's doors.
I think nowadays, and what's funny enough is that I actually talked to Matt Griffin a few minutes ago before coming on here, and it's like the platform that we're presented is a lot better now than it is back in the day. Because now, back in the day, I've heard a lot of podcasts with Talk is Jericho or the Stone Cold podcast where you would have to send out tapes and you would have to send out this and you have to send out your full resume, and like you're writing it out, and versus you can go on Facebook Messenger or Twitter and message people and just be like, hello, like I am XYZ, I wrestle for XYZ, I've trained for XYZ. And so it's easy, it's a very fast-paced world that we live in, and also you need to have a lot of exposure. Not saying to be stuck glued to your phone 24/7, but I think being on like Twitter and being on Instagram and just showing your content out there, someone's bound to watch it and be like, oh, this guy's good or this girl's good or they are good. Like that's just one of those things where you spotlight yourself a little bit more and you push yourself more. So it's all about advertising yourself. And so that way it's not like you don't have to force it down promoters' throats, but it's also just promoting it out there for promoters to see or for people to see in general as fans.
Yeah, and I also think, and this is just my opinion, is that it's weird where algorithms are complicated, where you never know what a podcast is going to hit to. You never know what this show is going to hit to. I've obviously had people get movie deals and get indie film deals with their comics and other stuff because a director saw an interview that I did, and then also it's the idea that if I interact with a wrestler, all of a sudden it happens every once in a while where something then gets like 100 replies, and that affects algorithms because so I'm interjecting and somebody else comes in and then somebody else comes in, and it becomes a really cool thing. And I think that that's a big thing too. And I think even companies now look at that. I think, Beyond and, Wrestling Open and even Action to some degree look at how their wrestlers interact with their fans. And I think that can either get you a booking or it can cancel a booking, because if, you're a wrestler and fans like, oh man, I loved your match, and you tell that person to burn in hell, it's not a good look. And so I think we're in a very interesting era right now. And I think it's fascinating in so many ways. But I also think that it's fun. And I think fun sells. I think the fact that like I reached out to you on Twitter and we were joking about, I'm gonna one up you, I'm gonna follow you, and then you're like, oh man, I can't, do that. That's a whole fun exchange. And it changes a relationship. And I think that it's such an interesting time at this point where we're at, because I think fans and wrestlers are closer than they've ever been before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I agree with that, because you have a lot of people that are willing to, I like granted, and then, like I tell people all the time, like when I do make my little plug at the end of like, where to find me, like Facebook and stuff like that. I don't mind adding people that I know really well as a friend on Facebook, because I use my name as my shoot and work name, but I want them to follow my page and like to like it, because I get messages all the time from fans, and it's like I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's like there's a fine line between being a fan and just saying like, hey, and how's everything and blah blah blah, to trying to get into my personal life. Now granted, there are a few fans that they've kind of grandfathered their way into my life, and that's fine, because they're trying to help promote me and push me, especially up in the Northeast, and there's a few fans that I'm very thankful for, and I consider them some friends. But then you have others that's just like they try to be in that, and it's like a fine line of, again, being a fan versus just being a friend. And so I'm thankful for all my fans. Yeah.
Where we're in my world, there's circles, and I come from the comic book world, and so there's people that are close, there's people who are business associates, there's people who are on the fringes, and there's people that I'll interview you, and our relationship is completely transactional without money, meaning that you're a guest and I want you on my show and I'm going to push your stuff out, but that's just where we're at. And I think it's complicated as well because right now, since everything's been so close, that it's hard to figure out. And I mean, it's tricky. It's tricky. And even for me, I mean, I'm an interviewer, and it's even tricky for me to ask because I'm like, hey, I just want to interview you, but I don't really want to get in your personal life. But then somebody views it that way, and it's complicated. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that is tricky about it. But I digress. Um, and so obviously there's a lot of stuff you're doing, and I think it's ultra fascinating. And I am curious even to go further into this. Where do you think wrestling's going? Because obviously we are at an evolution right now. We are in an evolution with AEW. We're at an evolution with the WWE. I think Impact is evolving. I don't know much about New Japan because I haven't been paying much attention to them. I'm sort of swamped between WWE and AEW and the indies. But even IWTV and GCW are evolving. And it's very, very interesting. I'm very curious where we're going with all this and how you view it because I'm an outsider looking in and you're an insider looking out. So I think your opinion has a little bit more validity to it than mine.
There's a lot of growth going into different promotions because you can't say that, because at one point everyone's like, oh, AEW is at the pinnacle because, they have all these XYZ stars that came from WWE. And then like WWE was kind of like going downhill. But now that you have a different person in power and they're understanding storylines and everything's not so hokey, they're starting to bring that back up. And then AEW is kind of like going down going down just a little bit. And I think there's a fine balance with it too, because again, all wrestling is beautiful. There's not one thing that I could say like, oh, who's your favorite, what's your favorite TV to watch? Like I watch WWE, I watch AEW, I watch Impact, I watch New Japan. I'll watch MLW. Like I have some of my close friends on MLW, like Alex Kane and Myron Reed, which they're killing it. And it's one of those things too where you want to support, and it's like again with me, it's like I have friends in wrestling now, so I'm able to see it again from the inside out and support them. But yeah, like you were saying, IWTV, GCW, they're all evolving, and I think it's growing into something that everyone can appreciate because it's like it's kind of like your own flavor of ice cream. Like you're gonna have your favorite flavor, and your favorite flavor may disgust me. That's the same thing with the wrestling. So there's always something out there for everybody, whether it be old school, technical, high flying, strong style,
Yeah.
you name it.
I think the way I describe it is that if you want more hardcore, but you don't want it to be, ICW, no holds bar, you have, Matt Tremont's, promotion, which is, hardcore hustle. And that's dropping every Monday essentially. But if you want something more like Wrestling Open, and something that, is showcasing a lot of really good wrestlers with some veterans and some people who've been around a lot and giving a lot of people opportunity, and not so focused on storyline, I feel, because Wrestling Open, there's not like a central storyline running through it. I feel like it's just good matches and good rivalries. I don't think like there's like a championship at the end, which is kind of nice. I don't think there's a belt in Wrestling Open right
There's
now.
not.
And it's nice just to have wrestling and have rivalries and no titles. It's so nice, man. It's because it just takes so much pressure off as a fan.
Exactly.
I feel.
Yep.
But I think that I agree. It's very much a choice, and I've said this before, where what's going to dictate media is on demand, customization, and big libraries. Those three things are dictating media, and they're going to dictate a lot of stuff. And as an investor, those are the things that I'm looking at. But I digress. I do want to get you out of here. We're going to go over to like 47 minutes. So I hope you can stick around for 2 minutes.
Extra. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I'm clearly joking. I know you got to get out of here because you got an early day tomorrow. But I do want to give you a chance to promote yourself. So where could people find you? Where could people hit you up? Obviously, I think I have your Pro Wrestling Tees up above. If I don't, I will add it in after for everybody who sees this after the fact. Obviously, you're out for a little while, so that money can be very helpful. The little bit of money can be very supplemental. So keep that in mind, everybody. Where can people hit you up on social media, tweet at you, bother you, watch you wrestle, see some of your old matches, all that fun stuff?
Yes. So you can go to so the first one's going to be my Facebook, and again, like I mentioned earlier, and I'll restate it again. There's a fine line between fans and friends. So I do have my own personal page. So if you don't mind hitting the like button on Landon Hale, but it's Landon Hale on Facebook. You can find it. Then on Instagram, Landon Hale 3. On Twitter, it's at Hale Yeah 3. And then on YouTube, you can type in Landon Hale and you'll see a bunch of my matches from whenever I first started out in the business. I think my first ever match is on there. So if you can find that, that would be awesome. All the way up till now. And you can catch me on IWTV. You can catch me on Wrestling Open, which I may make some appearances there, even though I'm in this. So I may do commentary. Who knows what I'm going to be doing. But you could see me on Wrestling Open. You could see me on some chaotic shows. I definitely know in the future you'll be able to see me at We Are Wrestling, NFW, New Evolution Wrestling, Colossal Championship Wrestling, Invictus Pro Wrestling. So there's a lot that there's in store. So all I gotta say is that the good doctor's in, and we're here to light it up. And for everyone else, it's lights out.
And if you type in Landon Hill on IWTV, a bunch of matches will pop up as well. So that's the other thing too to keep in mind, that if you type in a wrestler on IWTV, it does pop up. So keep that in mind too. And all I'm going to say is that, and I said at the top of the show, you have to support indie wrestling. That means going to shows. That means buying merch from your favorite wrestlers, buying T-shirts, whether you buy directly from them out of this show or on Pro Wrestling Tees or wherever else they're selling it. It goes a long way. And look, you got to follow people on Instagram and Twitter, and particularly on Twitter when they're wrestling, you need to tweet at them. It makes a difference, and it's a big deal.
And also, I forgot to plug this in. I know I sped through one of them when we were making a joke about it, but Pro Wrestling Tees, if you do want to support me, it's www.prowrestlingtees.com/Landon Hale.
And so obviously, that's what I'm saying. And that's the way how to support somebody financially. And even if somebody's not hurt, you should still buy their T-shirt because it does supplement income. But again, the best way how to really support a wrestler without spending money is actually following them on Twitter and tweeting when they wrestle, because it does make a difference. It's a blast. It's fun. It's fun when they respond, and it's a good time for all. I'm going to quickly promote myself really quickly. Obviously, you can subscribe to me on Twitter at Pop Anime Comics, Instagram Pop Anime Comics, Facebook Pop Anime Comics. You can subscribe on YouTube Pop Anime Comics. I do have a class talking about comic book investing, teaching the basics, coming out later in October. It's supposed to come out early. I had an issue with my computer. It's solved. It just delayed me by 2 weeks. We are 65% done recording the class. It's going to be 18 to 22 hours, and it's going to be on Udemy for $40. So if you want to learn that skill, and if you would like to support this show, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link. I appreciate when people do that. It's not necessary, but again, it helps, and that's everything. But I do appreciate comments, checking it out. I like that Justin Del Rio is watching or was watching. That's pretty cool. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word, and we are slightly over by 3 minutes technically.
You're fine. So like I said, thank you guys for the support. I'm definitely going to make a lot of noise in the Northeast, especially once I'm back. I shouldn't say making noise, continuing to make noise. So I'm very thankful for you guys to support me. And again, prowrestlingtees.com/Landon Hale. And just keep an eye out on Twitter, keep an eye out on Instagram to see where you'll see me next once I'm back from my injury. But until then, the doctor's out.
And I don't think I could have said that any better myself. So everybody, that is a wrap.